Most people think that I'm being over spiritual or over religious by saying this, that everything is spiritual. Everything is spiritual. And if we don't look at it that way, we will be an easy target. We will miss the signs, because there's always only the powers of darkness and the powers of light, the forces of darkness or the forces of light. Those are the only two types of energies that we're really dealing with. And a lot of times we're at war with people and things that we think it's the person, we think it's the situation, or the problem is the problem, but the enemy is the enemy. It's always the same power of darkness behind what's happening. And if you don't look at it that way, you won't know how to combat it. You won't know how to respond to it. For example, when you are having an issue with a person, it's usually not the person. The Bible says that the weapons of our warfare is not carnal. It also says that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. And sometimes it's so hard to believe that, because we see the person. We see a familiar face. But behind that familiar face, if they're saying something that's opposing, if there's warfare, if there's friction, there's a spirit behind it. And a lot of times the person doesn't know. We don't know a lot of times when we're being used, or we're allowing the forces of darkness to interrupt or interfere with what we have going on. It's important to recognize, because then you will realize that the person that you're arguing with is not your enemy. It's the powers of darkness. When Christ was about to go on the cross to fulfill his purpose and his destiny, the person that he loved the most, the person that was the most closest to him, even beyond his own family, Peter, when Christ was telling him what was about to happen to him, Peter's response was, "That's not going to happen to you. Like, don't say that." And Christ, if he would have responded in the natural, there would be no salvation. If he would have been like, "Yeah, you're right, Peter. I shouldn't say that. I'm not going to do this. You're right." If he came into agreement with what Peter said, we would not have salvation. Peter was being used by the enemy to slow him down from his destiny. Christ was able to look at it from the spiritual perspective, and he recognized that it was Satan behind him trying to slow him down. So he responded in the spirit, and he said, "Get behind me, Satan." He recognized that it wasn't even Peter, it was the enemy. And this is how the enemy comes. He comes very subtle. And it's through, a lot of times, the people that we're familiar with, the familiar faces. So it doesn't look like the enemy. Remember, Satan comes as the angel of light. He's not going to come looking like an enemy. He gets in, and he's the serpent. So he comes in, and he knows what to say to manipulate us. He knows what to say that even sounds like truth. If there's people in your life, it doesn't matter if it's your friends, your so-called friends, your frenemies, your family, if they're slowing you down from your destiny, that is the forces of darkness using them. And you have to be able to recognize, because if you don't, you will be trapped. You will be trapped. Everything is spiritual. Everything is spiritual, and it's always the same force. It's either the forces of darkness or the forces of light. Everybody is sent. The question is, who sent you? And you always have to remember that with every opportunity you get that comes your way, and with every person that comes into your life. The person is either meant to push you to your destiny or take you away from your destiny. One way or the other. There's no in between. There's no in between. There are moments when we all fall short, and we, do things that could possibly, we can do things that could slow people down. But ultimately, the bigger picture What is that person's, ultimately you have to consider the bigger picture. What is that person's assignment in your life? Why are they in your life? There are people that could be in your life that are taking up too much of your time and your space and your energy. And it's either a deposit or it's either a withdrawal. Are they depositing something in your life? Not what you are hoping for them to deposit, not their potential, but what are they depositing in your life? Are they pushing you towards your destiny, or are they slowing you down? And that's what you have to consider. And that's why everything is spiritual, because some people don't know when they're being used. And sometimes we don't know when we're being used or when the person is being used. This is why it's so important to be in tune to the spirit, because God reveals all those things. And the more you walk in the light, the more you walk the path of righteousness, the more you see darkness. That is what the job of light is. The job of the light is to expose the darkness. So the more you decide that you want to live a righteous life, the more warfare you might experience. But God has given us the power, the tools. We can't fight in the flesh. And this is why it's important to understand what your warfare really is. The enemy is the enemy. And as long as you know that, you will always win.